So this is part of the Advisory Fundamentals course in which you're all enrolled. And this course is the first half of the Reader's Advisory work that we do here with Info People. And this is the basic course. Starting in September, we'll be offering the advanced course that will get into multiple formats and advising in multiple formats. What we're going to be talking about today is the difference between providing Reader's Advisory services from a library perspective and simply providing guidance to bestsellers and so on and so forth. I'm going to share with you some of the reading logs that your classmates have been doing that I find to be exemplary, and then we'll go over just a few free advisory help things that you can find online, not only to help your own readers, but also, Nancy, did you remember to turn on the recording? Nancy?
Recordings, yes, recordings.
Great. But also so that you can get some further advice for yourself as an advisor. And then we'll have questions and discussion at the end. As I said, raise your hand at any time. You can input your questions into the text chat box at any time, and Nancy will collect those and we can get back to them during the questions and discussion. So let's start with this one. What's different about advising if you're in a library, working in a library, versus when you are working in a bookstore or you're talking to your next door neighbor or your daughter about what to read? Well, first of all, there's the whole thing of you're collaborating with the user who wants a good book to read. You're not marketing to them. And although we've spent some part of last week talking about where you have book displays and list displays, one of the big differences between what we do inside a library and from a library and what happens out in sort of the popular world is that we should be collaborating to find out what the reader wants rather than what's available and then trying to get the reader to take what's available. The scope and depth of our collections is very, very different from what you're going to find in a bookstore, even if it's Amazon. One of the things that you want to remember about those collections that you're seeing in bookstores is that they tend to be newer materials because things do go out of print relatively quickly these days. And they also tend toward at least mid-list and usually front list if we're talking about things like things that are in reviews in the New York Times or in the Los Angeles Times. And we're not seeing in those places, which are marketing tools, we're not seeing, for instance, the depth of local poetry books that you might have in your own collections, or the kinds of classic history texts that you might find a reader really wants to read. One of the things that comes to mind is when Nehru, Indira Gandhi's father, was in prison. He wrote her letters every day. She was a teenager, and every day he wrote her a letter, and it was a brief history lesson from world history. Now that was published, his collection of letters was published in the 1940s. It's not the sort of thing that's going to pop up in the New York Times. It's not the sort of thing that's going to pop up on NPR too likely. So when you look at what you have to advise from, you should be seeing a lot more scope and a lot more depth in your collections than just what's new, what's hot, and what's being talked about in the press. Another thing that's really different about what we should be doing when we're giving reading advice is our interviewing techniques. Our interviewing techniques are intended to help the individual adult reader learn a little bit more for himself or herself about what he or she likes and what appeals. Not just give me the name of the last book that you liked and I'll find you one just like it, but just as you went through in early forums in this class, really helping the person to sit down and analyze all the possibilities, all the things that he or she never put together as parts of the puzzle that forms that appeal profile that that person might have. Part of our jobs when we are doing the interviewing with our readers is to help them be able to name what appeals to them and also figure out what it is that they want in the way of feeling in the next moment that they read. Oftentimes we'll find that people who have enjoyed a certain type of book for one reason or another don't want to indulge in that kind of material at this time. This can happen, for instance, when somebody's gotten very, very bad news about their health or a family member's health, and what they want to do is escape for a little while into a book. They may be after some light reading when usually they typically are more interested in heavy reading. The other thing that we do quite differently in libraries than marketers do in the marketing world is that we really do need to cross any barriers to access. Whether we're working in a public library, a community college library, or a school library, we need to make sure that all readers can find something to read, not just readers who are already good, sophisticated readers who have a lot of practice in reading. One of the differences between collaboration and marketing is to sit down and think about what your goals are. For instance, if you want to collaborate, your own goals and resources at the library and my goals and my resources as me as a person and our mutually shared goal forms collaboration. Whereas if you're marketing the materials that you have, what you're doing is saying, okay, I have these goods and I want your attention. You're not particularly interested in my goals, you're not interested in my resources, and we don't have a mutually shared goal. Some examples of marketing that's disguised as Reader's Advisor you probably are going to be coming across as you work through this class. Raise your hands if you've gone to Barnes & Noble in the last year and looked at your cash register slip. Did you notice that you can put your hands down, did you notice that it said, well, since you've just bought this book, you might want to buy these other 4 too? Raise your hands if you noticed that. Okay. Typically, put your hands down now, typically what that means is we've got lots of copies of these other 4 books. It doesn't really have anything to do with you as a person. It has to do with what's available and what needs to be marketed. This is also true for some publishers' theme lists and guides. They tend to be newer books. They tend to be books that have been available in hardback and are now newly available in paperback. That's not always the case. For instance, Penguin is busily putting out guides to what we could call new classics from throughout the 20th century. Bestseller lists, though, are definitely examples of marketing. The way that books originally get attention enough to find their way onto bestseller lists is because the publishers themselves have poured more money into the marketing of those specific titles. It's like a horse race. They've placed their bets. They think these specific titles are going to do the best in the marketplace, and so they get the most advertising, which leads, of course, to the most readers, which leads, of course, to it being a bestseller. When we talk about the scopes and depth of collections, what we're really talking about is a collection that's built for very local users. Typically, whether you're in a public library, once again, or a university library or a school library, you're not collecting materials just because it's popular in New York City, unless you're in New York City. It's also a collection that's been developed across years and years, and some of you I know are working in relatively new libraries, but even at that, the collection's been built for 30 or 40 years. It also is much easier in a library to find the back volumes in a long-running series, and that's the case because typically newer volumes come into print and the older volumes have either gone out of print or are much more difficult to find. The other thing that's a little bit different is that our own integrated library systems, that is our circulation system and our catalog working together, in a way provide a sort of inventory of what we own. And I say that meaning that we can look to see what's not on the shelf, but what we actually own, and make suggestions from those materials as well, knowing that the person with whom we're speaking can take something now and then has something to look to later. One of the essentials of the interviewing that we do in a library is to use open-ended interviewing questions rather than closed-ended ones. And a fine example of that would be, what kinds of character are you looking for? As opposed to, are you looking for flat characters or well-rounded characters? That's a closed-ended question. What kinds of characters are you looking for is an open-ended question. What that does is help you as the advisor know a little bit more about the reader, but it also helps the reader understand a little bit better instead of having to select what you have predetermined are the choices. The other thing that we do in a library, of course, is to make sure that our interviews are judgment-free. I remember that one of you handed in a really nicely written blurb that referred to inappropriate behavior between the characters. And certainly if you were talking to a library client, you would probably not use the term inappropriate, because that means that you yourself are making some sort of moral judgment. And of course, that's not our business. The Americans with Disabilities Act is something that we need to keep in mind when doing readers advisory work in the United States. And that means that sub-collections like our large print collection need to respond to anyone who might need to use those collections, rather than allowing them to get old and dusty and say, well, you know, we only have 5 people in the community using them and we've got 200 books. I don't think we need to buy any new ones. We don't need to replace any that become destroyed. We also need to address local language needs and preferences. There are communities in which many people may speak a language other than English, but prefer to read only in English. But if we're also building, for instance, a Chinese language collection for readers to read, we need to make sure that it's kept up to date and isn't allowed to founder after we've spent our $200 that we have for the year on Chinese language materials. We need to be able to treat every customer group with relative fairness. You've all been starting to keep reading logs, and I know that when I made this assignment, one of the things that I've done each time I've made this assignment is to ask you to create it on your own in a manner that will work for you, whether it's cards in a recipe box or a spreadsheet or whatnot. And now that you are in your 3rd week, I thought I would show you some people that they've been working on and give you an idea of the kinds of things that you can do with these logs. So first of all, let's take a look at one that has used a spreadsheet style. And thanks to Erwin for allowing me to do this. And you'll note that his spreadsheet allows him to input the publishing data. And then the next column, he's put in the appeal factors. So that's very, very closely bound to the title. So in future, he can go back and look at this very, very quickly and just go down that middle of the page looking for appeals that seem to suit the interests of the person who's in front of him. If there's someone in front of him who wants really fast pace and minimal exposition, he's got that there right smack in the middle. After that, he's got the plot summary, and he's done a very good job of keeping it very tight and tidy. And he's also provided other hooks so that if the appeal factors and the plot summary may be not exactly what the person had in mind, but he does hear from that person there's something else, and it's that other hook. It's highly accessible and brings the reader squarely into the mind of the characters. It may be someone who's never thought of reading Stephen King, just because they didn't know that one of the things that Stephen King does is make it a quick trip right into the head of his characters. So that's a great example, and thanks to Irwin for that. Another example comes to us from Barry Olmsted, and Barry has set her log up so that it looks like it's cards, and I don't know in real life, it might be cards, and Barry can tell us about that later. But what she's done is she's provided herself with a field in which she's got quick access to the title and publication information, and then she's gone in and teased out the different appeals so that, for instance, under plot, this particular book, The Big House, is complex. Under language, it's rich language. She's given us the pacing as leisurely and the mood as nostalgic, among many other things. Her very quick summation of the book is there, and it's not a full sentence, and that's just fine. This isn't about writing a review or even a shelf talker that you would put on a bookshelf and allow people to read. This is meant for your own use. This is meant to remind you of all the possibilities of books that you can suggest to future readers. So then under her hook, she's got an ode to the rituals and idyls of summer and the rich traditions of a notable but intriguingly flawed Cape Cod family. That's a lot of hooks in there. So, and she's done it with very, very minimal words. It'll be easy for her to scan in the future. And then thirdly, thanks to Galena, we have another example. And one of the assignments last week was to think about asking someone to suggest a book to you in a genre that you don't read as your own personal thing. And Galena did that, and she doesn't usually read Westerns, but she went ahead and did a 10-minute read of this so that she could get a feel for what a Western was like, and she got the recommendation from a coworker. She wasn't just going blindly to the shelf. And she's done a great job here with the appeals. It's action-packed. The main character is strong and capable and beautiful. And one of the storylines is such that if one is interested in having clarity about morals, good and evil, then this would be more appealing than if you're interested in only ambiguous morals. She's also gone to the detail that I'd asked that some of you try to pursue in this particular assignment, and actually considered what the book itself looks like. It's a paperback. That means that it's probably going to be lighter to carry around in a backpack. It's going to be easier for some people to handle, but it may also be that if it's a regular paperback, that its print is relatively small and it doesn't have very good margins. So those are all things to keep in mind as you're thinking about making suggestions to would-be readers. So thanks to the three of you for letting me share your reading logs. And the rest of you have been doing a great job too. I just wanted to give you examples of 3 different approaches. Okay, so let's move on to part 3. There's a lot of free advisory help online. And I know for this week you're looking at some that are for readers themselves, but I also want to introduce you to some that are meant for you as advisors. So once again, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen right now and show you some particular sites, all of which are free. So the first one is Reader's Advisors News, and this comes from Libraries Unlimited, which is a library publishing company, and it's a blog for readers advisors. There's a lot of stuff when you first look at this. It will tell you about upcoming publications. Now you could stop here and say, okay, so these are the books coming out and people will come in and ask for them. But one of the beauties of having this kind of news, if you're an advisor, is to go through the list now and think about, okay, what books do I have in the collection by this author or on this particular topic that maybe this new book hasn't arrived yet, but I could be thinking about what books to suggest while people are waiting for these, or I might want to think about the possibility of a display that features one or another of these particular authors. There's also a list over on the right, Summer Books 2012, that is actually done by source, and this is a great place for you to find other free sources of recommendations, both for yourself and for your users. For instance, nobody in this class is from Michigan, so it may be that you've never seen the Cottage Bookshop. It's got a list of beach reads. Which will typically take place around the Great Lakes rather than at the ocean. So those of you who aren't at the ocean might want to take a look at those for beach reads. Further down on this blog page, you'll also find information about the Reader's Advisor online. Try the free Reader's Advisor database based on Libraries Unlimited print genre-selecting advisory series. And that's a very long-running series that includes things like science fiction, but also includes thrillers as individual volumes. And now they've made free a database that's based on this large collection of books. So that's something that you'll want to explore as well. Finally, you'll see some book covers. And what's important about that is that people often do judge a book by its cover. And you may be familiar with a book that you know has a bad cover. And that's a good thing to know, too, when you're talking to particular users. Please don't stop at the cover. With others, you can simply say, yep, it's just what the cover offers. Another site that I think it's important for you to be aware of comes from the federal government. It comes from the Library of Congress, and it's their Project READ. There's a ton of free stuff available here. It's available for adults. It's also available, there are kids pages and teen pages, and there are pages for educators and parents as well. There's a list of resources right here, including contests, including book lists, things that are available from communities within the United States, and not just at the federal level. One of the things, though, that I really love on this site is something that you might want to think about connecting to your library's webpage if it's talking about books. And those are the author webcasts that are available. These are for free. You can link them right to your own library's website and allow your users to hear and see authors doing their stuff, talking about their stuff. And there are a lot of them. There are just 3 that show on that front page, but there are many, many more. So that's definitely a bonus. Total free. You get to add some reading advice that comes in a medium other than paper and print, or a web page with a list of books on it. Another direction that you might want to think about taking has been done in the Edinburgh, Scotland City Libraries. What they've done is they've taken a map of Edinburgh and they've overlaid on it the covers of books that take place in the city of Edinburgh. So I know there are a number of you from San Diego, and there are certainly a number of books published in San Diego, you might want to think about doing this. In the subsequent course to this one, Beyond Books, the Advanced Readers Advisory course, we will be making maps, and this is something that you might want to do for a project. The way this is set up, you can see the city streets underlying this, and then you can click on any of the books that you see there, and what you get is the title of the book, the actual geographic location on which it occurs, a brief description of the book, and ready access to the library's catalog right here. Now, I don't have an Edinburgh, Scotland library card, so I can't do much about getting this book. But I think you get the idea of how straightforward this makes it for users of this website. And then last but not least, I wanted to take you to Reading Group Choices, which is a commercial site intended for reading groups that may be hosted by your library or may be hosted beyond your library, and they simply use you to make sure that they can get 16 copies of one book at one time. But one of the things that's on this site is a pairings opportunity. And the one I'm showing you right now is music. They also have wine, and there are some other ones. What's fun about this is it allows you, if you are hosting book discussion groups within the library context, to think about moving out beyond simply talking about the written book and providing background music that might be appropriate to that book, asking the people in the group to put in their own suggestions for a playlist that might go well with a particular book that they're discussing, and so on and so forth. As I said, this is a really deep site. There are a lot of other possibilities on it, so it's one that you want to harvest more fully as well. Okay. So we're now going to move into the discussion and question section of this meeting. And we can start with suggestions some of you may have for other free websites for advisors rather than for users. You can ask questions about anything that comes to mind since you've been taking this course, or you can try to give us a good sell on the best book you've read in the last 10 days. So does anybody have any remarks or questions? Okay, and that would be Lisa. Do you want to unmute yourself and talk to us? Okay, let's see. I see a note from Emily, but Louisa, did you have something that you wanted to say? We'll come back to you in a minute after you unmute yourself.
I'm trying to unmute her, but her
muting is too slow. Oh, there we go. Okay, Louisa, you want to try now?
Yes. Go ahead, Louisa.
Oh, hello. My question is, is there a website that lists the books that are on a series? Because I get a lot of questions. You know, they want to know what the next book in the series is.
Yes, there are. And thank you, Angela. The Kent District Library What's Next site. Your classmate Angela is putting that forward. It's actually, the website is called What's Next, and it's from the Kent District Library, which I believe is in Michigan. I might be wrong about that, but it's usually referred to as just by its initials, KDL.
And Emily above her mentions fantasticfiction.com.
Yeah, well, fantasticfiction.com does a good job with fantasy, but not with all possibilities. So it's fantastic fiction, which comes from the UK. It's wonderful for fantasy and for science fiction and for things that are available in Britain, and many of those things are available in the United States. The 10th District Library, on the other hand, does not only genres like science fiction or fantasy or mystery, but also provides series that may just be related because they have the same character in them appearing over and over again, but they aren't necessarily in a genre like science fiction or mystery.
Thank you.
And Barry, oh yeah, Barry, do you want to unmute yourself, or do you want to?
I think this is working.
Yes, it is.
Yes, Early Word is a great website.
Yeah.
And by the way, for my reading log, I just did a Google document. I kind of made it like a recipe card. So I thought I would just keep it online.
Yeah. So it's a Google document. So that means that virtually anybody can do that.
Yes, it's a template. So it was great. It was easy to plug in.
Great. And Early Word, which is the site that you're recommending as a good free site for people, actually comes from a group of publishers, and it's wonderful because it doesn't have one particular publisher bias. They also regularly have online meetings that any of us can join. So that's another thing to keep in mind when they're going to be discussing new books of the coming season. You can follow them on Twitter and generally find out when that meeting is. I used to remember it. It's typically on the same day of the week. I'm thinking Tuesday, but I'm not sure about that. Other suggestions for people?
Julie accidentally sent a message just to me. She says, I like Stop You're Killing Me.
Stop You're Killing Me, yes. Stop You're Killing Me is a great website for those of us who like murder mysteries. And who sent that? I'm sorry, Nancy.
Julie Horn.
Julie, do you want to unmute yourself and talk about Stop You're Killing Me at all? Okay. Emily is suggesting Goodreads.com. Goodreads is huge. And Emily, I'm going to ask you if you would to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about how you use it. Can you unmute yourself?
We use it a lot to keep up with the teen releases. We use it a lot to, if I like this, I'll like that kinds of things.
Do you use it for reading backward at all? I mean, do you ever use Goodreads to find out about books that were published 5 or 10 or 15 or 50 years ago?
We usually use fantastic fiction for that, to find out if this is the new book, what did they write a long time ago?
No, I'm not meaning that so much as in appeals. For instance, I like rich language, and I like complex characters, and I want to learn new vocabulary words, but I'm only accustomed to new books that do that. Do you ever use Goodreads? It's possible to use Goodreads to find materials that were written long ago that would have those appeals. I'm just wondering if you ever do that.
I have not used Goodreads for that.
Okay. You might want to give it a try because it really works really nicely for that. One of the things that also Goodreads does is put out a monthly newsletter that has lots of good programming ideas. Have you used that version of it?
I do get their newsletter, but we haven't used it for programming.
Okay. Okay. Oh, and Julie Horn, who is not going to unmute herself because she apparently would then be telling everybody in the world our top secret, says that she's also using Stop You're Killing Me to find award winners. And award lists are a great way of looking back in time. Literary awards, most of them will supply you with a list of everyone who's won going back to the beginning of the award. So if you're looking for who won the Hugo in science fiction back in 1987, that's readily findable on the Hugo site. Stop You're Killing Me has award winners in very many mystery sites. Susie Lemoyne is saying that she liked Stop You're Killing Me too, but she found the site itself to be bland in its presentation. So actually, Susie, I'm guessing what you mean is that the actual website as opposed to the information in the website. Susie? Yeah, okay. It's the look of the website. And some blandness can be good, and sometimes blandness just looks boring, huh? Recommendations from anyone else? Are there questions from anybody else that you'd like the group to entertain? Yes, Erwin.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I actually, well, my staff had a person come up yesterday, and he was looking for a title that was mystery, and he wanted it to be he wanted the language to be non-offensive. He didn't want a lot of curse words. Is there something they couldn't figure it out at the desk. I didn't have time to look, but I figured this would be a good question to ask here.
Yeah, there's actually a subgenre of mysteries called cozies, and cozies typically do not have colorful language. They tend to be gentle.
Okay.
One of the other, I mean, there are cozy mysteries, but one of the other words that gets used a lot in websites for readers advisors and also in book blurbs as kind of a code for clean language is gentle reads.
Okay.
Yeah, cozy or gentle reads. And cozy, sometimes it's, Bob, I don't know why, but sometimes it's C-O-Z-Y and sometimes it's C-O-S-Y. Oh, and Barry, the question was how to find books for somebody who wanted mysteries, but also didn't want any quote-unquote offensive language. And Angela is suggesting Terry Blackstock as an author. Okay, great. By the way, you should know that this whole webinar is being recorded. And so if you're having trouble keeping up right now, don't worry about it because it's going to be mounted on our course page in archives form, and you'll be able to listen to it and look at it again. Susie Lemoyne wants to know if anybody else is using Polaris as their ILS system. Susie, do you want to tell us why? Susie? Okay. Oh, great, because they use it in Susie's library to use the read-alike help function in it. So does anybody else have an ILS system that's providing reading advice for its users? And Erwin, you're getting a bunch of possible authors and websites coming in. And I'm going to ask Nancy to also print the chat that's going on now so that we have this list. Okay, let's talk about novel lists. Kathy Landis just brought up novel lists. How many of you have used novel lists yourself to find a book for your own reading pleasure? Okay, great. Okay. One of you, any one of you, just raise your hand. Tell us a little bit about how it felt to you using it, the experience itself of using it. Anybody? Okay, Sarah, go ahead.
I absolutely love it. What I love about it is that they link appeal factors. So if you like a certain book for a certain appeal factor, you can click on that appeal factor and see other books that have that appeal, that specific appeal.
That's great. Okay. And Julie Horn is saying that she finds that the interface is a little bit clunky. Does anybody else have a feeling that you're working a little bit to get the book? Not so much, okay. And Wendy says that she's finding it a little difficult to use. It does take a certain amount of concentration and dedication, not in a bad way, but it's certainly, it is intended for people who feel relatively at ease interacting with an online source. I personally love interacting with online sources, but I know that when some people come to me for reading advice in the library, they've come to me because I'm a human. And so it does mean to be aware that if you're being asked for reading advice, before referring the person to something like Novelist or even any of our free sites that we're collecting here, to make sure that the person is comfortable with that they haven't already had access to that, and what they really want is a human-to-human conversation about what to read next. We've got about 5 more minutes. Okay, does anyone have a computer station that is used primarily for patrons to access bookmarked readers' advisory sites? Susie, that's a wonderful thought. Does anybody do that? Looks like you can be first, Susie. Other questions and comments? That's great. Okay.
Francisca, this is Nancy.
Yes.
I just noticed a message from Stacy that came to me. She says,
okay.
I'm really stumped. I find the folks on the Fiction L listserv to be really knowledgeable and helpful.
Good, Stacy. Yeah, Fiction L is a listserv to which you can subscribe. I didn't actually mention any subscription lists because these days they aren't typically as valuable to us as they used to be before we had so many online tools. Fiction L has been around for about 15 or 16 years at this point. And what it is librarians and other library staff members talking about fiction only. And I think, Stacy, if you can unmute yourself and tell us a little bit what you mean by being stuck, that would be helpful.
Just when I feel like I've sort of gone through whatever resources I could think of, and granted that's before this class, so I couldn't think of a lot less then than I could now, but and I'm just not getting anywhere. Then going to Fiction L and just posting a question, you know, my customer's looking for this and this, and people are really quick on there and and knowledgeable. And the other thing they have is they have lots of lists that you can go to their archives and get themed lists and read-alike lists and tons of stuff.
Right, right. They do a really good job of repackaging material that they've had previous discussions about and providing those lists. That's a really good point. Any other hidden questions out there or declarations? Okay, Nancy, you've gotten a picture of who's here. Nancy?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, I've sent that to you.
Okay, that's great. And we're also going to collect this discussion in terms of words, the text chat, so that we've got all of those sites. And what I'll do with the text chat is Nancy will send it to me, and I will pull out all of the sites that got mentioned in the text part, and then I'll post that as a separate document when she posts the archive recording along with the slides, and I also will include the other places that we looked at together during the initial presentation. Okay? Okay, folks, you're doing a great job. It's lots of fun having you in this course, and I will see you again online. Thank you for coming this afternoon.